The neon lights of the arcade cast a kaleidoscope of colors across the polished floor, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere that transported me back to a simpler time. Quarters jingled in pockets, and the symphony of electronic beeps, boops, and victory jingles filled the air with nostalgic energy. This wasn't just any arcade. It was Pixel Palace, a retro gaming haven that had somehow survived the digital revolution, standing proudly as a monument to the golden age of gaming. I remember walking in that Friday night, the familiar scent of slightly buttered popcorn and the faint metallic tang that seemed unique to places filled with arcade cabinets washing over me like a comforting blanket. Let me tell you about that night, the night that changed everything for me. My name is Alex, 26, working as a graphic designer by day, but a dedicated arcade enthusiast by night. I'd grown up with these games, learning the patterns of Pac-Man ghosts before I could properly tie my shoelaces. But it was always the racing games that called to me most. Something about gripping that wheel, feeling the resistance as you drifted around corners, the rush of passing opponents in the final stretch. I'd become something of a local legend on Turbo Thunder, an old racing cabinet with worn stickers and a seat that creaked in just the right way when you leaned into a sharp turn. That particular Friday night, I'd come alone as usual. My friends appreciated my passion for retro gaming, but didn't share my dedication to weekly arcade pilgrimages. I was midway through my third race, completely in the zone, when I felt someone watching me. Now, I was used to occasional onlookers, people waiting for their turn or curious about the guy who could navigate Turbo Thunder's notorious Rainbow Road track without a single crash. But this felt different, more focused, more intentional. When I finally looked up after crossing the finish line, I saw him. Tall, with tousled dark hair that fell just above eyes that seemed to catch every colored light in the arcade. He wore a vintage Pac-Man t-shirt that looked authentically worn rather than artificially distressed, and his smile had this crooked quality that immediately made my heart perform a perfect imitation of a Galaga ship being hit, complete explosion and all. "Nice driving," he said, his voice carrying easily over the arcade noise. "I haven't seen anyone handle the Rainbow Road like that since, well, ever." I managed to thank you, suddenly very conscious of my worn jeans and the fact that I probably had that intense, gamer-focused expression on my face. He introduced himself as Jamie, 28, new in town and working as a video game developer, which explained his appreciation for the classics. There was something about him that seemed both confident and slightly nervous, a contradiction that was immediately endearing. "So," I ventured, "are you just here to watch, or do you play?" The challenge in my voice was unintentional, but Jamie's eyes lit up in response. "Oh, I play," he replied, that crooked smile widening. "Though I should warn you, I held the high score on Turbo Thunder at my old arcade for 3 years running." And just like that, a friendly rivalry was born. I shifted over in the seat, offering him the chance to prove his claim. As Jamie settled in beside me on the narrow bench, I couldn't help but notice the faint scent of his cologne, something woodsy with hints of vanilla that somehow perfectly complemented the arcade atmosphere. He inserted his quarters, and the game roared to life, the pixelated countdown beginning. Jamie was good, really good. His driving style was different from mine, where I was technical and precise. He was intuitive and daring, taking shortcuts I'd always considered too risky. By the final lap, we were both leaning forward, completely absorbed in the race, our shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that sent unexpected currents through me. He was just about to overtake the lead car when his thumb slipped on the boost button at a crucial moment. Without thinking, I reached over to help, but instead of touching the controls, my hand landed on his. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then, instead of pulling away, Jamie adjusted his position slightly. "Here," he said, his voice softer now, closer to my ear. "Let me show you something." And then it happened, the moment that would replay in my mind for days afterward. Jamie leaned over, his chest pressing lightly against my back, and placed his hands over mine on the wheel. I could feel the warmth of his palms, the slight callus on his right thumb, probably from years of controller use. The race continued on screen, but suddenly it felt like background noise to the thundering of my heart. "Feel that," he murmured as he guided my hands through a complex series of movements, executing a drift boost combination I'd never mastered. "It's all about timing and pressure. Not too hard, not too soft. I nodded, not trusting my voice, acutely aware of how close we were, how naturally our movements synchronized. We crossed the finish line in first place, the victory music blaring, but neither of us immediately moved away. For a moment, we just sat there, his hand still resting lightly on mine, both of us staring at the new high score flashing on the screen. When Jamie finally pulled back, I felt the cool arcade air rush between us, and I had to resist the urge to lean back into his warmth. He looked slightly flushed, and I wondered if my face reflected the same heat I felt rising from my collar. "So," he said, clearing his throat slightly, "what do I win?" The question hung between us, layered with possibilities. I surprised myself with my response. "How about I buy you a drink at the bar next door, and you can tell me about all the other games you claim to be better at than me?" Jamie's laugh was genuine and warm. "Challenge accepted," he said, standing and offering me his hand to help me up from the low racing seat. The arcade bar next door was dimly lit, with vintage game artwork adorning the walls and cocktails named after classic characters. We settled into a corner booth, and what I had expected to be a brief, casual drink turned into hours of conversation. Jamie told me about growing up in a small town where the local arcade had been his sanctuary, how he'd known he wanted to make games since he was 12, and how moving to a new city had been terrifying but necessary for his career. I found myself opening up too, sharing stories about my own childhood, my struggle to convince my parents that art and design were viable career paths, and my collection of vintage gaming magazines that I kept in protective sleeves. With each story, each laugh, each moment our eyes held contact a beat longer than necessary, I felt something building between us, a connection that went beyond our shared love of pixelated racing. "You know," Jamie said, twirling the straw in his Sonic Blue Blur cocktail, "I saw you playing last week too. I wanted to say something then, but I chickened out." "Wait, really?" I was genuinely surprised. "Why would you be nervous?" He shrugged, a gesture that somehow combined vulnerability and charm. "Cute guy, completely in his element, surrounded by the things he loves. It's kind of intimidating." The word cute echoed in my mind, confirming what I'd been hoping but afraid to assume. "Well," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm glad you found your courage tonight." Our conversation flowed easily back to gaming, but with a new undercurrent of acknowledged attraction. We debated the merits of different gaming eras, discovered we had both cried at the same moment in Final Fantasy VII, and challenged each other to mental duels of obscure gaming trivia. All the while, I was hyper-aware of every time our hands brushed reaching for shared nachos, every time Jamie's eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. When the bar announced last call, I was shocked to see it was nearly 2 a.m. We'd been talking for over 5 hours, and it had felt like minutes. Neither of us seemed eager to end the night, so we walked slowly back through the now-quiet arcade, which stayed open until 3 a.m. on weekends. The space had emptied considerably, with just a few dedicated gamers scattered among the cabinets. Without discussing it, we drifted back to Turbo Thunder, but this time, instead of competing, we took turns showing each other our favorite tracks and techniques. There was something intimate about it now, each demonstration an excuse to lean close, to guide hands, to share space. During a particularly challenging mountain course, I was struggling with a hairpin turn that had always been my downfall. Without a word, Jamie stood behind me, his arms reaching around to cover my hands on the wheel again. But this time, there was no pretense of gameplay necessity. It was a deliberate choice to be close. "You're overthinking it," he said softly, his breath warm against my ear. "Feel the rhythm of the road instead of fighting it." I tried to focus on his gaming advice, but all I could think about was the solid presence of him behind me, how right it felt to be enclosed in his arms. I deliberately missed the next turn too, just to prolong the moment. When I finally completed the course, I turned in the seat to thank him, not realizing how close this would bring our faces. For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other, the arcade lights playing across his features, highlighting the question in his eyes. "Jamie," I said quietly, I've never met someone and felt so immediately." He saved me from my stumbling words by gently placing his hand on my cheek. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I'd really like to kiss you right now, if that's okay." The honesty in his voice, the absence of games or pretense, made my heart swell. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and then his lips were on mine, soft, tentative at first, then more certain as I responded. The kiss deepened, his hand moving to the back of my neck, mine finding purchase on his waist. Around us, the arcade continued its electronic symphony, but in our little bubble of space, all I could hear was the sound of our breathing and the thundering of my own pulse. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jamie rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since I saw you demolish the high score last week," he confessed with a small laugh. "You should have," I replied, "though I'm kind of glad it happened like this instead." We spent the remaining time until closing wandering through the arcade, playing random games, but mostly talking and stealing kisses between high scores. There was a giddy, teenage quality to it. This newfound joy in discovering each other, but also something deeper, a recognition of something rare and worth exploring. As we exchanged phone numbers outside the arcade, the pre-dawn air cool around us, Jamie hesitated before saying goodnight. "So, same time next Friday?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I was thinking maybe sooner," I replied. "There's this new exhibition on the evolution of video game art at the downtown gallery tomorrow. Or well, today actually." His smile was answer enough, but he confirmed anyway. "It's a date." That first night at the arcade set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Our relationship blossomed through shared experiences, hunting down obscure game cartridges at flea markets, introducing each other to our respective friend groups over board game nights, cooking dinner together while debating the merits of various game soundtracks. Each day revealed new layers to Jamie, his patience when explaining complex game mechanics to my non-gaming friends, his passion when discussing the narrative potential of interactive media, his vulnerability when sharing stories of growing up gay in a small town where he'd often felt alone. Of course, it wasn't all smooth racing. About a month in, we hit our first real obstacle. Jamie had invited me to a work function, a launch party for his studio's new game. I'd been excited to see this part of his world, to meet his colleagues and see him in his professional element. But as the event approached, I noticed him becoming increasingly evasive about details. It came to a head the night before the party when I asked what time I should arrive. Jamie's hesitation was palpable even through the phone. "About that," he said, his voice tight, "I'm thinking maybe it's not the best idea for you to come." The hurt was immediate and sharp. "Oh," was all I could manage at first. "Can I ask why?" His explanation came in a rush of words, about how his studio was very competitive, how he was still establishing himself, how some of the senior developers were old school and not particularly progressive, how he'd never actually brought a date to a work function before. "So you're not out at work?" I said, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "It's not that simple," Jamie replied. "It's not about being out or not. It's about keeping my personal and professional lives separate while I'm still proving myself." We went back and forth, the conversation growing increasingly tense. I understood his concerns on one level. Workplace dynamics could be complicated, and everyone had their own timeline for integrating different aspects of their lives. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play, a hesitation about us, about me. The conversation ended awkwardly, with neither of us really satisfied. I spent a restless night wondering if I'd overreacted, if I was asking too much too soon. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I needed to be more understanding, that pushing Jamie would only damage what we were building. I was surprised when he showed up at my apartment the next evening, the night of the party, dressed in his event clothes, but clearly not on his way there. "I thought you had your launch tonight," I said, confused as I let him in. "I do," he replied, his expression serious. "And I want you to come with me, as my date, if you still want to." The change of heart needed explanation, and as we sat on my couch, Jamie provided it. He'd spent the day reflecting on why he'd been so resistant. It wasn't really about his colleagues or his career. It was about his own lingering insecurities, the defensive habits formed from years of careful self-protection. "I realized I was falling back into old patterns," he admitted, "keeping parts of myself separate, compartmentalized. But that's not how I want to live anymore, and it's definitely not how I want to be with you." His honesty touched me deeply. We talked for nearly an hour, sharing fears and hopes, before finally heading to the party together. And while there were a few curious glances when Jamie introduced me as his boyfriend, a term we hadn't officially used until that moment, the night was ultimately a success. I watched with pride as he demonstrated the game he'd helped create, his passion and talent obvious to everyone. That night marked a turning point for us. Having navigated our first real conflict, we emerged stronger, more certain of what we were building together. The following weeks brought a new depth to our relationship. More honest conversations, more authentic sharing, more integration of our lives. Our arcade nights remained a sacred tradition, though. Every Friday, without fail, we returned to Pixel Palace, sometimes with friends, but often just the two of us. We established our own rituals there, starting with Turbo Thunder for old time's sake, then exploring different games, always ending the night with a cooperative game where we worked as a team. 3 months after our first meeting, on a particularly busy Friday night, Jamie seemed unusually determined to secure the Turbo Thunder cabinet despite several groups eyeing it. When I questioned his insistence, he just smiled mysteriously and fed his quarters into the machine. As the game loaded, I noticed something odd about the start screen. Instead of the usual press start flashing in blocky letters, it read, "Alex, will you be my player too?" I turned to Jamie in confusion, only to find him holding out a small box containing 2 matching keychains. Miniature arcade cabinets with our initials engraved on the sides. "It's not a ring," he clarified quickly, a hint of nervousness in his smile. "That would be moving way too fast, even for someone who drives like you. But I wanted to give you something to mark 3 months since you let me put my hands over yours on that wheel. 3 months since my life leveled up in ways I never expected." I was speechless, my heart full to bursting. All I could do was pull him into a kiss that said everything words couldn't, about gratitude and joy and the exhilarating journey we'd begun together. Around us, the arcade continued its timeless dance of light and sound. Other gamers focused on their own quests and adventures, unaware that right in their midst, a love story was writing its next chapter. As we broke apart, both grinning like teenagers, Jamie nodded toward the Turbo Thunder screen, still waiting for a response. I picked up the controller, selected yes, with deliberate precision, and turned back to him. "Player 2 is officially in the game," I said, "and I'm playing for keeps." The beauty of our story wasn't in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though the arcade proposal was pretty spectacular in its own nerdy way. It was in the everyday moments. Jamie remembering exactly how I liked my coffee in the morning, me learning to recognize when he needed space to work through a creative block, both of us gradually creating a shared language of inside jokes and meaningful glances. It was in the way we navigated each other's worlds. Jamie patiently explaining game design concepts to my art school friends, me introducing him to the joys of traditional drawing techniques that complemented his digital skills. It was in the safe space we created together, where vulnerabilities could be shared without fear and dreams could be voiced without judgment. And always, it came back to that first night at the arcade, to the moment when he leaned over my racing game, his hands wrapping around mine on the wheel, teaching me that sometimes the most unexpected connections happen when you're simply doing what you love, open to the possibility that someone might join you for the ride. Looking back now, I realized that what started as a chance encounter beside a retro racing cabinet has become the greatest adventure of my life, one filled with challenges and victories, quiet moments and exhilarating discoveries. And while we can't know what levels await us in the future, I do know this. With Jamie as my player too, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Total _char_count, 18,836.